Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, and we're coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of Western North Carolina, where we are experiencing absolutely gorgeous fall weather every day for a while now. My favorite time of year. All right, well, today's an interesting podcast, I think, the subject, and I also think it's really important. It's really relevant to what's going on in the world. There's this principle. I was a double major of math and physics in undergrad, and there was this expression that they used in mathematics. Talking to one of my college professors once, I remember, and we were talking about the phrase intuitively obvious. For example, 1 plus 1 equals 2. It's intuitively obvious, And then it's interesting that the whole concept of intuitively obvious can become increasingly scrutinized and debated. What may be intuitively obvious to an expert in complex variable analysis may not be very intuitively obvious to somebody who is into abstract algebra. I don't know, just as examples. But the point is, intuitively obvious is such a critical phrase, and it goes so deeply into this notion of what's really intuitively obviously valid, and what's really do we feel like it's true, but it's all based on our bias, and just how far from that goes. How far does that go? What's really intuitive and what's just a result of being indoctrinated. And oh gee, in the world today, there's so many things going on that just makes such great examples for that. And it speaks also to the notion of this idea of a second brain. There's a book, Percival, Thinking in Destiny. It's a pretty dense book. It's a big book and takes some dedication to read the whole thing. I've never read the whole thing, but he talks in there about the idea of a second brain. Percival talks about it. The idea is that when the physiology is really refined, the stomach is actually a brain. So it's its digestive function, but it also functions as a brain. And we can sense that somewhat with the idea of like gut instinct, or we have a gut feeling or what have you. But oftentimes, that's influenced by imbalances in the physiology. Just the other, chicken soup for the soul versus it makes me sick. You know what I mean? And so there's truth to it on all levels. But the question is, how healthy is our gut instinct? And what's it based on? Is it based on bias, or what's it based on? And so what's going on in the world today? There are some really, fascinating examples. Like, we could spend a long time going through all the examples, but for one, Sweden. Sweden is having all kinds of troubles now because there's been so many migrants have entered Sweden, and it's almost started to feel like an invasion, and a lot of people are having real problems with it. In fact, now they're trying to get into, I understand, the government and install Islamic law, Sharia law, as the legal system in Sweden. And so, a lot of the people are up in arms also in the villages. And we're not making generalizations here about, Muslims or Islamic people. In every culture, in every religion, there are good people and there are not so good people, but they're having trouble in Sweden, evidently, with a lot of the not so good people. Islamic people, that they're going into villages and they're doing horrible things. I understand, very degrading. What's the word they use? Just humiliating things to the people there, and even the children. And it's just downright abusive. You know, even the words torture is used. And so at any rate, Sweden's got big headaches with that, and so as a result, uh, issues are coming up. Now, on the one hand, you could say, well, those people are racist, and that's why they don't want, the migrants to come in. On the other hand, there's a certain culture and there's an integrity to that culture. And what could be inherent, by the way, and acceptable in one culture degrades another culture if it was imposed upon it, because it's just not natural for that culture. It's not consistent with natural law for that land. And so that's occurring in Sweden, but in fact, it's occurring throughout Europe. Italy, there's a whole movement now, and this rising woman political leader, I can't think of her name right now, but she's moving in the direction away from that. And Greece, Spain, Portugal, you just go right up, France, Holland, Germany, Austria, Poland, and of course Hungary. All these countries now are like, this is not working, And even in the United States, well, a great example is Martha's Vineyard and what happened there. Of course, Governor DeSantis from Florida shipped, 50 migrants, Scotty, up into Martha's Vineyard.
Right.
And within, I think, 48 hours or less, they people in Martha's Vineyard shipped them out to a military base in Cape Cod. Now, this gets very interesting because Martha's Vineyard is a sanctuary, has proclaimed to be a sanctuary area, and so what do they mean by sanctuary? And see, it gets interesting here because people are just quickly label the people at Martha's Vineyard, they're a bunch of hypocrites. Well, it's actually more, I think, complicated than that. And it's really, refining the clarity, getting more clear on what people, even in Martha's Vineyard or wherever, are really aspiring to and what they really believe in and what they just don't really have the language for. Language is a very powerful thing, you see. So what they really are meaning perhaps by sanctuary is non-racist, okay? Non-racist. Now, some people would say, well, Martha's Vineyard is essentially all white. Isn't that racist? And they have these people come in that are migrants and they're not white, and so they get them out in 48 hours. Isn't that racist? Well, this gets delicate, okay? But there's a distinction between racism and cultural integrity. The idea doesn't have to do with color of the skin so much as there's a nature of the culture. There's a nature of the mentality and the lifestyle inherent in that culture. I mean, Obama has a house on Martha's Vineyard, and they're all great with that. He's not white, so, but he fits into the culture. And so what we're talking about here, it shouldn't even be called a sanctuary city. It should be a non-racist city. And you could even say a non-racist city that still holds its cultural integrity. And this whole thing, even though they're not using these words, and they need to, because words are a powerful thing. They're an important thing. And even in Europe now, this is going on. And, are they being racist in Sweden, or are they just wanting to uphold the integrity of their culture?
Michael, I didn't see why. I heard that they were screaming about it, saying that they were going to sue DeSantis over sending him there because he bamboozled them. Why are they so adverse to having the people there?
Why are the Martha's Vineyard
Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, whatever.
Because you could even say the tonal quality or the nature of the culture is so contrary to the nature of the culture that's been set up in Martha's Vineyard. They don't fit basically. And then, of course, I remember hearing
They
somewhere
don't fit
online.
there, but they fit in Texas.
Well, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
And that's a very good point, because see, that's where it becomes elitist. That's where it becomes privileged. Is the Martha Vineyards, okay, they don't fit into our culture, but we're going to cram them into your culture. And the thing is, do they even
So
fit in?
that's it.
Do they even fit into the integrity of the culture of the border towns in the United States? No, they don't. Is that responsive, Scott?
I just can't understand why they're so upset, because it's like, hey, we're doing stuff. This is a problem. You know what I mean? And this may not fit in our scheme of things, but we
What do
need
you
to
mean by
do what we
scheme?
need
What
to
do they
do
mean,
for the
Scotty?
team.
What do you mean by scheme of things?
Okay, so let's say that, the situation is there's 2 million people coming off the border, or across the border, or whatever they've come off.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Can Texas handle them all, or do we need to all do our part to handle this? What's going on?
Well, see, that becomes another. Now we're getting off subject here in a
Yeah,
way, because that becomes a thing. Can we bring in 200 million people from a different cultural mentality
and
without
absorb it. Yeah,
compromising the integrity of our own culture?
right.
Now, it also has to do with just basic respect for the culture of the country that you're in. I mean, I've lived in Philippines, I've lived in India, I've spent a good amount of time in Cyprus. The point being that when I go to a country like that, when I'm in India, I respect the nature of the culture there. It may not be my nature. It may not be the nature of the culture that cultures my awareness, that is natural to me. But I choose to uphold the law of the land there. In another good example, South India, Kerala, the missionaries, Christian missionaries are going there. And I understand they are even paying Hindus to convert to Christianity. Now, see, this stuff all gets very deep and interesting and complex. But the thing is, there's only one God, okay? But that one God is referred to by different names. Some people might refer to that as the Christ Spirit. Other people may refer to it as Chaitanya, Bhavatitam. Different religions will have different names, but it's the underlying essence. And now we get back to the gut feeling, the inner sense, the inner knowing, the second brain. And in a lot of ways, that second brain is the feeling level brain. When the deep feelings are touching into the laws of nature, you see, and then we use our intellect then to articulate it, you see, as opposed to trying to use the intellect to fathom all this. And without the second brain, you can justify anything with the intellect. If the second brain is unhealthy, you can justify whatever unhealth or imbalance is going on there with the intellect. So that's why I see the intellect as a great tool, but it's a lousy master, you see. Uh, so there's a cultural integrity in India. It's 80% Hindu, I think it is, and it's been there for thousands of years. And to go in there and try to change it, really, there's a lack of understanding there, because it's not about paganism. It's not about anti-Christianity, or it's not. It just there's a different way of honoring the one God uh, in different parts of the world, and we don't serve that one God by ripping that to shreds. Am I being responsive here? Did I get off
Yeah.
topic, Scotty?
No. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so we're seeing that in Europe. We're seeing it at Martha's Vineyard. Uh, so if I had a criticism of the Martha's Vineyard people, it wouldn't be that they want to maintain their cultural integrity. I understand that, and I honor that. But what I don't care for is the idea that they're not respecting, we could say, the cultural integrity of the border cities in the United States or cities wherever in the country.
And I think the point I was trying to make, Michael, too, was, this is a time when, okay, we have our cultural integrity, but it's a state of, you could call it emergency, or there's a circumstances require that you do your part for the country, you know?
Well,
And
see that.
yeah.
What do you mean by for the country, though? Are you talking about for the 200 million?
Well, no, there's 2 million people that are coming across.
I meant 2 million. I'm sorry.
Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, can one state handle 2 million people coming in?
What
No,
should one state handle them?
no.
Should they be dispersed among all the states,
Yeah, I
or
think everybody needs to do their part. Yeah,
is it a degradation of the integrity of the culture of the entire nation?
it's a temporary until they can find out what to do with them. It's not like they're there permanently. I'll give you an example. Like
Well,
in New
what do you mean
Mexico,
after a certain period of time they're going to leave the country?
well,
No,
they're supposed to. They're supposed to come back, right?
come back. What?
They're supposed to, when they let them in, they're supposed to go back for a hearing, or they're supposed to do
Yeah,
something.
I mean you're dreaming, man.
Yeah, I know, but this is the part of the thing that just
it's not
the
gonna
system
happen.
is broken.
And so, but the point is here. Let's take
Yeah,
a step back and look at this whole border thing.
right.
The nation has a cultural integrity, and the problem isn't the cultural integrity of the nation. The problem is the difficulties in the nations where those people are fleeing.
Yeah,
And our attempts to heal that in the past have just been give them money. But the trouble with giving them money
doesn't work. Yeah,
is that it doesn't work. Basically, it goes to the autocracy of the nation, and the people don't ever benefit from it. Now, so the principle of what to do there. Also, there's, what is it? San Salvador, I think it is. There's this country in Central America, I think,
yeah,
and was it San Salvador, Scotty, where they the leader there, the president there, decided he was really going to crack down on crime, and so he did. And then what was happening with, he was saying, with, I saw an interview of him, with cell phones and everything, the trouble is the people behind bars are still running the criminal networks outside of the prisons.
right.
And so he did this thing where if crime occurs outside of the prisons, he still punishes the criminals that are in prison because he knows that they're the ones pulling the string. Now, that
Yeah,
may sound problematic or something, but as a result, that country has gone from one of the worst, most dangerous countries in the world to one of the safest.
huh. So it worked. That's funny.
Yeah. And so now we can apply that to not just the major culture, but subcultures. For example, the ghettos or the crime-ridden parts of Chicago, New York, Philadelphia. And that same principle can be applied there and all over the world if we would just crack down on crime. Now, in fact, and another case study that proves that worked is New York City. It was, I think, Giuliani, I guess, was the mayor then, and they decided that the people that commit the murders and the horrible crimes in New York City also were the ones jumping the subway turnstiles to get in free. That doesn't mean that everybody who jumps the turnstile is a murderer, but it does mean that most of the murderers are the people, and the criminals like that are people that would jump the turnstiles, right? Am I that making sense, Scott? So what they did is they cracked down on the small crimes, those little crimes like sneaking into the subway system to save a buck. And what they found was by doing that and really being tough on those guys, those people, the crime rate, the murder rate in New York City went way down.
it's almost seems like it's a pattern interrupt. You know what I mean? Where
No.
you catch them early and it doesn't go
Yeah.
down the line or something.
Yeah. And so now let's take a look at the Black communities in the inner cities. Uh, the and they interview the again, every culture has a high end and a low end. Every subculture has a high end and a low end. And the healthy conservative people, the and I don't mean politically conservative. I mean the ones, the non-criminals. So I should have used a different word because that certainly has a connotation now. But the good people, the people that just want to, have their job, have a living, take care of their families, they want crime to be cracked down upon in their neighborhoods. And so see, the whole problem gets so entangled because you start, here we are talking about crime and cracking down on crime, and how that links to another subject called cultural integrity, and how that links to and needs to be clearly delineated from racism. Racism is cultural integrity gone insane, I like to say. And then what to do about people crossing the border, all that. It's a multi faceted question, but it's one we need to address, and we need to address consciously. We need to reflectively, we need to think. Now, here some amazing examples, Scotty. Brazil. This is really, and then we'll get into Ukraine, and all these studies are really amazing. But what's going on in Brazil right now? South America, and now this brings up all these things are bags of worms, but South America is being basically infiltrated by the Chinese. And a lot of the countries there, most of the countries there, in fact, I think we could almost say perhaps that with the exception of Brazil, most of the countries are leaning more in the direction of China as opposed to the United States. Now, the president of Brazil is very much pro-United States, wants to have goodwill and wants to work with the United States and have those values as opposed to communist values of the Chinese. Then we're talking about the communist Chinese now. Interestingly enough, people like Leonardo DiCaprio, there were a bunch of these Hollywood people that were down on Brazil, didn't want the United States to deal with Brazil because of the burning off of the rainforests. But if you take a look at it, you know who's burning off the rainforests in Brazil? It's the Chinese. They're doing it for purely financial purposes, you see. Now, beyond that, the president of Brazil is not thinking in a manner that's consistent with how the current president of the United States is thinking. Anti-woke, you could say. And as a result of that, the administration of the United States has stopped dealing with Brazil, which is basically pushing Brazil more and more in the direction of becoming communist and aligning with the Red Chinese, the Communist Chinese Party. And so you see all these, now we're getting into the politics, and it's all intertwined, isn't it? Can we go on now? Do you want anything more about Brazil? We could talk more, or about, let's do Russia and Ukraine. You want, Scotty?
Sure.
Okay. What's the guy's name? Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. This is interesting. He has been in contention with Russia for quite a while, and we could understand that because there's justification on both parts. It's arguing back and forth. Crimea Peninsula, Russians trying to take that over, blah blah. But the net result, and this goes back a couple of years, was that the president of Ukraine has got it in for Russia. He doesn't like them, and he is pushing and has been pushing for a long time to have NATO, to have Ukraine become a NATO country. And, to Russia, we have to understand that would be a little bit like the communist Chinese saying they wanted to annex Canada. I mean, we wouldn't want it, or Cuba or what have you. And so basically, the president of Ukraine has been provoking Russia for a long time. And as a result of that, Russia invaded. Now, I understand, and this was way back, as far as the history of this current conflict goes, they were willing to come to an agreement that Russia would pull out of Ukraine if Ukraine promised not to become a NATO nation. And that sounds good to me. I mean, all the people, the children, everything that have been killed, and the horrible things that are going on there. I mean, it sounds like a resolution. Our administration, I hate to say it, and this is just the way it goes. I mean, this is just the word that's out there, okay? Our administration wants to get Putin out of office. So they want to keep perpetuating this war until Russia gets defeated or until Putin gets expelled from office. And the Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, even said, and I saw it. There's a video. He was saying that if Russia, which they already did, if Russia even mentions the possibility of using, any kind of nuclear weaponry against Ukraine, he called for the United States, and this is just frightening. He called for the United States to immediately attack all the nuclear arsenals in Russia, wherever they are, with our nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
Well, he's talking World War III, Scotty.
Yeah, no, that's a ridiculous. Even
Yeah,
consider it's over for everyone.
Yeah, but that whole dynamic is going on, and it has to do with cultural integrity, judgment, bias, hatred. The whole thing becomes this similar ball of wax between the conflicts between the Islamic radicals and the Swedish population, or you see it in France, you see it in Italy, you see it in Greece, you see it in Spain, Portugal, Germany, Austria. So,
and that's also assuming that the story that that they're putting out there is what's really going on too.
Correct. And that's why I'm saying and I even put the beginning of the notes to this podcast that I publish in the blog, these are thoughts to reflect upon. They're not declarations of truth.
Yeah.
But I did see the video of him saying that stuff,
I know, but it's so crazy people can say, whatever, now it's just crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And also it has to do with, people need to get really clear. We would go a long way if we got clear on the distinction between racism and cultural integrity. And it's happening. It's happening. Hungary, the president of Hungary, he's keeping everybody out. He says, we have a cultural integrity. I don't think he uses the word, but if he doesn't, he might as well, because he wants to maintain it. And all the people in Hungary are very happy about it, by and large. I mean, it's a good thing to maintain cultural integrity.
Well, Michael, do you think it's like almost like you're making a vinaigrette, where you're putting all these ingredients in a bottle and you're shaking them up?
Yeah.
Right? And now, okay, so it's force shaked into everything, and then all of a sudden, everything.
I don't like the phrase forced, because here's the thing: if you immigrate into another country, there's a certain degree of assimilating, or at least, and I'm not talking about whitewashing, but I'm talking about accommodating, respecting the nature of the culture of that nation that you are immigrating into.
Right.
As opposed to undermining it, as opposed to abusing it, using it, which, I can't help feeling, you mentioned these guys that some of the 50 that DeSantis sent up to Martha's Vineyard are now trying to sue DeSantis for pain and suffering or whatever. I mean, then we get into the whole legal system and the insanity of the legal system, and the legal system's no longer about justice. It's about the law, and the two don't have anything to do with each other. It's all so entwined, Was that coherent enough?
Sure. It just seems to me like, when I'm saying forced, it's because they're forcing their way in, and it's putting all these ingredients together. But now and then some of these cultures are like, nope, let's keep this. Their oil belongs there, vinegar belongs there, herbs belong, whatever it is,
Well, we are a country of immigrants, and so
yeah.
they are assimilatable and integratable in a healthy manner without undermining the integrity of each of the subcultures, and without imposing and that's why I admittedly you push my buttons with the word force, and that was my problem, not yours. But so there's a delicacy to the whole thing.
Sure.
But talking about abandoning the second brain, I mean, did you hear this, Scotty? The governor of California, Gavin Newsom, just signed a bill passing the composting of human corpses.
Yeah, I saw that.
Where you know about that? What?
You can become fertilizer or something like that?
Yeah, just taking people's dead bodies and turning them into fertilizer and spreading them on your front yard.
Yeah.
What do you think of that, Scott?
That's, that's wild. But
Okay, wild is tell me more. Where are you coming from with respect?
It doesn't sound right to me. It doesn't feel right.
It doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
And what are we talking about there? We're talking about the intuitive sense.
Right.
Well,
there was another thing where you could.
I call it the become a tree. I'm sorry, Scotty. I'm sorry. We call it the intuitive felt sense.
Yeah.
Or even in the arena of mathematics, what becomes intuitively obvious. There's something intuitively obvious about it's not okay to grind up people's dead bodies and spread them in your front yard.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Scotty, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, it's just there was another thing where you can. I saw where you can. I don't know if it's they have cremated you and then you go inside this little pod for a tree, or they put your body inside this pod and then the tree. It's almost like you're like the old times when they showed how the Native American Indians a fish with their corn or whatever something.
Well, see, that's an interesting thing too, because let me ask you this, Scotty: is there a distinction from your own inner feeling between putting a fish under a tree to fertilize it and chopping up somebody's relative and putting them in the tree?
Yeah, no, there's definitely a distinction. It just
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And what's happening there? That's one subject.
Yeah.
Give them a fish they eat for a day, teach them how to fish they eat for a lifetime. And the distinction is intuitive felt sense. There's an intuitive felt sense. There's a second brain that's even the more important brain when it comes to cultural integrity. And we're not talking about bias here. We're talking about an intuitive felt sense that's based upon the depth of wisdom that dwells in our being.
Yeah.
Not based on bias. There's some people that you hear talking and they say that preachers and things I've seen, the world is such a mess right now. The only solution is God. That's the only way we're getting out of this mess is God. And based on what somebody might mean by that, it can be total nonsense, in my opinion, or it can be profoundly wise. The idea is that there's an underlying basis to all of existence Physics, they call it the unified field, that one thing that's the source of all things. And it's self-interacting, it's dynamic, it's a source of all the wisdom, intelligence, harmony, coherence, peace, all of that, that upholds the whole universe. And our method of tapping into that is by refining the intuitive felt sense, the finest feeling levels in our being, unadulterated by bias, by indoctrination, by a confused mind, a confused heart. You see?
Yeah.
And that's what this is really all about. Now, Queen Elizabeth, her funeral, you know, I teared up watching it, and at the same time, you know, the English have done horrible things. We talked about this last podcast, but they've done horrible things to a lot of their colonies. You know, anyway, I won't go into the details with it, but the thing is, Queen Elizabeth to the world, as by and large, doesn't represent all that. She was a person of integrity and decency and honor, and spoke eloquently and respectfully and won over world leaders without even taking a political stance on any of that stuff. Um, and and her funeral, on the one hand, you could look at it and, oh God, you know, too ceremonial, too this, too that. But it's not, because what it does is it enlivens the sense of so many great words: honor, dignity, cultural integrity. What is cultural integrity on a national level? It's national pride. It's national tradition. People are talking about getting rid of the royalty, that whole system. I don't agree with it. I think that we want to uphold that, because that it feeds the nation. It has to be kept healthy, and clearly that it's comprised of people, and people that do crazy things, but nevertheless, you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. And it's worked. It works for that nation when it's maintained in that light. You see, uh, every culture in the United States, the Constitution uh, is something we use as a touchstone, and it's a touchstone to what? Our own inner divinity. You see, same kind of idea, and it crops up different places in different parts, in different levels of society. When I was a little kid, our school teachers somehow embodied that. You know,
Yeah.
it doesn't seem to be that way in a lot of schools anymore. You know, and as that gets unhealthy, then, you know, and then it gets in the whole idea: does the government own your children, or do you? You know, who's in charge of your children? You know, and what they're taught. You know. And it's all about health, you know. I heard a nice quote that I really liked. Bruce Lee, he said, "Words are energy, and they cast spells." You know, why do you think they call it spelling? Isn't that beautiful, Scotty?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I know that my teacher used to say that a very significant percentage of your evolution is determined by how you speak. You know, words are energy. And so we need to be attentive, because a lot of people, you know, they can act very properly when they're facing somebody, but then behind the scenes, gossip, rumors, negativity, all that stuff, that's casting spells. And oftentimes the way it's translated in the Vedic tradition is curses. uh, you're putting curses on people when you do that. You know, spells, they have power, they have energy. And they say that when you do that, you get more karma from the curse than the person that you're cursing, you know. And so that's an energetic dynamic that's very real, and we need to pay attention to it. uh, Even he even spoke about, you know, even in jest, don't speak negatively of yourself, because the idea, the way he put it was quite eloquent, but he was your physiology, your being doesn't know the difference between whether or not you're joking or not, you know. It's food for thought, you know. Woke, the whole woke thing, I'll tell you what, the whole woke thing, it reminds me of the hippie movement. It's just another fad like bell bottoms. It's going to fall the wayside because it's too out of harmony with nature. Well intended. But again, this blurring between notions, and the example we used here was the notion of cultural integrity versus racism, for example. Uh, the idea of honoring other people for who and what they are, but not imposing their values on us to the point where or our children, to the point where our children get confused. And the root, the fundamental basis for the health of the child is the health of the family. You see, in the values of the family. So that's a cultural integrity. A home is a culture in and of itself. You see. I think that's about it. There are a couple of political things here, I guess you'd call them, that I'll just throw out just because I think they're amazing. There was $900 billion for COVID unemployment relief. Estimated 400 billion of that, almost half, was taken by international fraudsters. Do you know that, Scotty?
Yeah.
Oh, you did. How about that? And $45 billion in the pandemic unemployment monies were taken by fraud.
Sure.
Incredible.
Well, they were talking about the money for Ukraine. Did you see that CBS thing where they had only gotten like 30% of the money?
Yeah, and what they say about Ukraine too is that the government is underneath. Oh, what do they call it? There's a 3-letter abbreviation they use for it. Private corporation, private individuals who are like a cap, who are really running all of that. And so a lot of the money that comes into the current Ukraine goes into the cap and out of the country in these people's private names or what have you, and doesn't even get to the country itself.
Yeah.
All this is going to get straightened out, and it's going to get straightened out as people wake up. It's going to be grassroots. And this whole thing, you see, that we were talking about with the problem with the cultural integrity in Sweden and all that, the people are waking up, and they're not going to stand for it anymore, and it's going to change everything.
Yeah.
We
That's
are
like the girl
entering
in Iran.
we are entering an enlightened age.
Yeah.
What's that, Scotty?
The girl in Iran. Did you
What?
see what's happening in Iran?
Go on.
She wore the hijab. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
She didn't wear it right, and they arrested her and beat her to death. And then now all the women. I mean, there's massive uproar, over this.
There's a high end and a low
Yeah.
end to every culture.
Yeah.
Boy, oh boy.
But
All right. Well, that's
up.
enough for today, I think, Scotty.
Yeah.
You have something more?
No, just people are waking up.
People are waking up. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week.